question comes up a lot, whether guitarists should learn a lot of the modes and various scales that exist. And it's not really a clear-cut answer. I think one of the issues is that there's been this notion thrown around a long time that you should just know all your modes and scales or you're not a real guitar player. And that's not entirely true. Music is language, and there are some, languages that you don't speak. You don't have to speak, right, unless you want to. And I think that, like, if we think of Delta blues, there's a very specific language to play Delta blues authentically. There's a very specific language to play bebop authentically. There's a very specific language to play impressionistic music authentically. There are recipes and mindsets that come with each of those genres that are helpful to know in order to nail that music. If you're playing a lot of classic rock and I would say early blues, there isn't as much use of modes, or I would say like harmonic major, harmonic minor, melodic minor. They tend to be largely based on major and minor keys, and a lot of times the scales tend to be pentatonic, minor and major pentatonic, because those are the sound combinations that really sound great, or people started using as music started being associated as that genre. Those elements are what were being used, and we associate that now. If we think of like Creedence Clearwater Revival, right? There's a lot of major and minor pentatonic uses, but especially a lot of great usage of major pentatonic scales used in that music. You don't have to know like Locrian or the altered scale in order to play a lot of CCR or Muddy Waters, right? Or even Led Zeppelin for that matter. It doesn't really enter into the vocabulary that much, except sometimes maybe by accident. But there are some types, I shouldn't say accident, but by happenstance or just by wandering creatively. But one thing is, in the jazz language and in the classical language, we see a lot more use of adventurous scales and modes, because that is part of that language. And if you want to play that music, then it makes sense. If I'm playing over a blues, I'm not, first of all, I mean, occasionally you might see a minor 7 flat 5 chord, but you're not going to be using that chord or the Locrian scale all that often, and the same thing over like an augmented 7 chord, you're not gonna. In a lot of classic rock music, you're not really going to be using the whole tone scale, right? A lot of rock music, they do tend to use like Mixolydian, right? We tend to use Ionian, Aeolian, so relative minor, right? And sometimes, depending on what genre of classic rock you're in, we do use the Dorian mode a little. I think one thing that we have to stop is this, I don't know, gladiator-like mentality when it comes to music, and people trying to use your knowledge of various languages, or if you don't have the knowledge of all the languages, often associated with speed and prowess, that we consider people to be lesser than. And it is simply not the case. There are some people that just decide to speak a particular language, and they're happy with that language. I am of the mindset that I really like to be able to speak a variety of languages, and I really enjoy those colors. So there's times when I am strictly playing just minor and major pentatonics. I'm playing in Delta blues or the classic rock world, and I'm really happy with that. But there are other times when I'm working in the classical realm, and I really like using diminished scales, and the jazz world, I use a lot of modal interchange and switch between different modes and for different chord colors. There's a lot of ways that I use these things, but I'll be the first person to say that you don't have to know. I think it's important to assess what languages you want to speak, what music you listen to, and do a little research of what is involved in that music. If you're a big fan of, I don't know, Muse, right, the band, so maybe find out what goes into their music, right? And if those are sounds that you like, then you could dig a little deeper. If you're into John Coltrane, obviously that's going to lead down a different path than if you're in the John Lee Hooker, right? Or if you're into Jimi Hendrix versus XTC, and you know, they're all going to have slightly different combinations, just as it would be if you're into Bartok, right, or Schoenberg, right? So they each have languages and scales and knowledge of theory that goes along with it. But don't feel bad about it, and feel free to always take some time to assess what kind of music you're into and what ingredients it may take, and don't feel like you're lesser than, because if you play blues and you only play the minor pentatonic scales, you know, there's been so much made out of, right? I mean, you can have a whole lifetime of playing that music, but you know, there's times where, you know, you might want to play some Dorian stuff, you know. It all depends on how you want to extend your library. So I offer guitar lessons and music theory lessons, composition lessons. You can reach out to me at anatomyoftone.com. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to talk. And if you want to inquire more about intermediate to advanced lessons.